In the last video, we discussed how we need to somehow update this manager variable whenever someone makes a lottery contract. So inside this constructor function, we're going to somehow want to figure out who just tried to create this new contract and assign the address of their account to the manager variable. In order to do this, we're going to use a global variable that is included with any time that we invoke a function in a Solidity contract. So let's take a look at a diagram that's going to help us understand exactly what this global variable is. As a quick review, anytime that we want to invoke a function, or in this case, create a new instance of a contract, we have an account, we create a transaction, and we send it into the network. And that's what creates our contract instance. The global variable that we're going to be using is referred to as the message object, or MSG for short. This object has some properties on it that describe both who just sent in a transaction to the network, and it also describes some details about the transaction itself. Now, one thing I want to make clear here is that this MSG object is available not only when we create a new contract, it's also available with any function invocation. So if we were to say call a function, we still have access to this MSG object. Again, it is a global variable that is used to describe who just sent in a function invocation. Let's take a look at some of the properties that are included on this message object. All right, so here we go. We've got 4 different properties that are super relevant for us. The first property is the data property. This is present on any transaction. So remember, the data property includes, in the case of contract creation, the contract source code. And if we're trying to just invoke a function or send a transaction to a function, then this will contain some of the arguments that we're trying to send to that function. It also has a gas property, which is the amount of gas that we have available to us to run some bit of code. Now, you might be thinking, oh, this is great. We can figure out how much gas we have available to run some code. We can make sure that we can actually run our code with the amount of gas that is available. Well, in reality, we very rarely actually make use of this property right here. Usually we assume that with any function invocation, an appropriate amount of gas has been sent along with the transaction. The next property is what's really relevant for us. So this is the sender property. This is the address of the person or the account who just sent in a transaction or a call to the network. And then finally is the value property. If a transaction is being sent in with some amount of ether tied to it, then the value property contains the amount of ether that has been sent in. So this is really important if we say want to make sure that someone is sending in a certain amount of money to our contract. And we actually will be making use of this value property later on inside the lottery contract itself. Okay, so again, the property we really care about right now is this message.sender thing, because it tells us the address of the person who is starting up this function invocation. Now, the last thing I want to repeat just one more time, remember this message global variable is available both when we send a transaction in and when we do a call. So anytime a function runs inside of our contract, we will always have this MSG object available. All right, so back inside of our code over here, we want to make sure that anytime a new instance of lottery is created, we want to get the person's address and assign it to the manager variable right here. So we're going to say manager equals msg.sender, like so. So I've been saying global variable, global variable. Again, a global variable, just like many other languages, means we don't have to do any type of declaration for this. It is an object that is always available inside of our code, inside of our functions. So we don't have to do any declaration or anything like that. It's just magically made available to us. Okay, so this right here should ensure that whenever we create a contract, we get the sender's address assigned to it. We can do a quick little test inside of Remix just to make sure that's the case. So I'm going to flip on over to the Run tab. I'm going to make sure that I select JavaScript VM right here, because remember, we want to use our local test network that is running inside the browser right now, rather than using the Rinkeby network. Then down towards the bottom here, or well, halfway down the page for you, remember I'm really zoomed in at this point, I'll click the Create button. That will pop open a new instance down here. And if I click on the Manager button, that will retrieve the value that is assigned to the manager variable. So I'll click on that, and it gives me an address of CA35B. And so CA35B should match up with the address or the account that has been selected right here that is tied to the virtual network that is running in the browser. So sure enough, yeah, CA3 and presumably 35B, so on. Cool, so it looks like our address, or excuse me, our contract is now recording the address of the person who created the contract. Now just one more time, this is gonna be the third time I say this, but I just wanna make sure it's really, really clear. We have access to this MSG object not only in a constructor function, we have access to it in any function that runs inside of our contract. And the reason that I am repeating this over and over is that we are going to be referencing the message object right here several times throughout this contract in many different functions. Okay, so with that in mind, let's continue the next section and start working on our next function.